Okay, now about the topic today. Let's jump to the topic. Now you should switch to the share window that I have. The topic is workflow designer and CloudSlang with Amazon EC2 instances demo. So this is what we are going to discuss. As I mentioned, I'm going to run it. So let's run around a few slides. Give me one moment. I want to enable a presentation pointer. Just 1 second. Yes, I have the laser pointer now. I will make use of this laser pointer. So the agenda for today. I thought it would be natural to start and discuss briefly about CloudSlang 1.0. This is the enterprise resi version that we already released in GitHub. And I thought it's natural to start with it because the workflow designer uses it. So why to show the workflow designer before explaining a few things about CloudSlang. So we'll run on a few items around CloudSlang. I'll try to focus on the new stuff that was added in this 1.0 enterprise ready version. And then we'll jump to the workflow designer. As you might know, this was already released in CSA 4.8. I will share a few things on paper, on slide, and then we'll jump to a demo. The demo will consist of showing both Workflow Designer or Central and some deployment and undeployment of Amazon EC2 instances. I hope you like it. And at the end of it, we'll have a question and answer session. Of course, feel free to ask topic related questions whenever you feel like. So just stop me, enable your audio, ask your question, and we'll move forward. After we'll try to answer and work together on the questions. Okay, this is pretty much the agenda. Now let's jump to CloudSlang 1.0, and as I mentioned, a few more things around. Now, a little bit of summary before we actually start to see the features of CloudSlang 1.0. Well, the first item that I thought it worth mentioning for you guys is the fact that HPO Central 1070 supports CloudSlang 1.0. This means that you can, for instance, deploy a content pack that contains CloudSlang workflows. You can manage the items that are within this deployed content pack. You can run and troubleshoot flows. Now, previous versions of O, like for instance, O Central 1060, also supported CloudSlang, but not CloudSlang 1.0. So CloudSlang 1.0, as I mentioned, is also the version used by the workflow designer, which got embedded in CSA 4.8. In terms of the changes, there are many changes, and I try to put just a few of those. Like for instance, the sensitivity of the inputs and outputs, and also the system properties that was added alongside the CloudSlang 1.0. Flow description and further syntax changes that occurred, as well as the addition of the decision step. This all occurred in CloudSlang 1.0, and they came from a big backlog and a big strategy and idea of making sure that future releases will be backward compatible to CloudSlang 1.0. Okay, this is just the summary before we start. Now let's try to dig in together on some of the items. So CloudSlang. Simply put, it is orchestration as code. So the idea behind it is to be able to write a very nice YAML-based code, human-readable code as well, and be able to translate it in the graphical manner that we are all used to it, and simply be able to switch from one of the views to another. So It's either you write it in as a code or write it graphically. You can always relate to one and another. This is what CloudSlang at the root is about. Now, in terms of language support, CloudSlang supports Java actions. So you can simply write your Java actions and then consume them in CloudSlang. So you can create wrapper-based flows on top of your, or operations or on top of your Java actions and use them. Now you were able to do this with CloudSlang even before 1.0 version. But with the introduction of 1.0, what we added was the ability to actually be able to reference your actions in a graph-based manner. So you can put the group artifact and version, the class name, and the actual method name in order to be able to reference your desired Java action. CloudSlang also supports Python actions. In 1.0, we didn't do much improvement, so that's why I didn't mark it as a new item. This is just as a refreshment for you guys. So you can simply write your Python script in the CloudSlang workflows, like we have it here. For instance, is a script of Python written on multiple lines. And at runtime, this script is being executed, and the items within it can be used and consumed throughout your workflows, basically. Okay, now let's see a few of the building blocks that CloudSlang has. Well, it has operations and flows, as you might already familiar with it. As I mentioned, you can write operations, for instance, on top of Java or Python code. Then you can design bigger workflows that do bigger stuff. You have an entire language around it. It's pretty easy to understand, and it's readable. As I mentioned, it's YAML based. And along with, so with the introduction of CloudSlang 1.0, we added the decision. Decisions, I would say, are pretty cool. They are, in my way, you should envision those as simple operations that assist you in taking basically decisions. Like, for instance, this example here, you have a simple input where you say, if this input is true, then I will get out on true path. If it's false, I will get out on false. These are pretty strong building blocks, and we'll see how we actually use them. CloudSlang big workflows. I'll try to show it to you today. Again, the decisions were added in 1.0, already there in GitHub. Now, in terms of further features, or actually features, there are a few things that are worth mentioning, even though they are not that brand new in terms of CloudSlang. First is the fact that it's agentless. So you don't need to put CloudSlang on any machine that you want to control. You have a simple host where you deploy it, and then you are able to communicate with various protocols, let's say SSH, or you are able to do HTTP calls. It also has data passing, so it's not about sending simple strings. You are able to send dynamic variables, like for instance, in this example, the host is getting the value from host 1 if a particular condition is true, or is getting the value of host 2, which are defined here. So this is pretty neat and nice data passing, and we are using Python expressions to handle those. We also have system properties. Now, in terms of system properties, you might be familiar with those as well as a concept from OO. It's pretty similar with a few changes because kind of relates to the CloudSlang language. The system properties are very easy to use. You can simply define an SL file that contains several properties in it. And then when you want to access a single property, you can just use a custom function that we design, which is get_sp, and be able to take your particular property. Like for instance, you can see here, we are going up to the point of the namespace of CloudSlang, and then we are taking only the percentage. So let's say in a particular flow, I want to get a value of percentage. This is the easiest way to do it. And you'll see this kind of like this kind of variable today in the demo when I'll show you the Amazon flows that we have. Further on about features, as I mentioned before, we added sensitive data. You can see here the sensitive tag, which says that this particular passport is with sensitive true. It means at runtime, these items will be encrypted, and people will not be able to see the values. Versioning, it kind of relates to what we added in terms of being able to access the Java actions through Gov artifact, class name and methods. At the root of it, we have Maven handling the versioning. Without getting into the details, what it means that you can configure some Maven local and global repositories, and Maven will be able to actually take your dependencies from those repositories. So you don't need to handle anything. Maven will handle it at runtime. This is pretty cool as well. And for those of you familiar a lot with OO, it relates to what we actually have in OO as well. A very nice feature, I would say, is the fact that we have on failure sections in CloudSlang, meaning that imagine you define a workflow with several steps. These steps can be either simple operations or additional workflows. And now let's imagine a workflow in which you don't want to take decision for each particular step, what happens in terms of a failure. So you can define like a default failure. For this particular example, I would say if run maintenance task fails, it will go on send mail. If send success mail fails, it will go on sending a failure mail here. This is pretty neat as well, and you'll see and understand better when I'll show you briefly Workflow Designer as well. Okay, more about the features. These are not that new CloudSlang, but I thought it worth mentioning. So we have the for loop and the parallel loop. They are pretty cool directives. You can just do a loop by doing loop for do, and that's it, or parallel loop for do. These are quite nice to use, and I'll show you how they are used, the Amazon EC2 demo that I'll show you today. Okay, we also, with the introduction of CloudSlang 1.0, created a plugin for IntelliJ. So if you go on IntelliJ, for instance, you can even download it from IntelliJ. We have these are the main author of it. You can find this plugin in GitHub, meaning that you can understand more about the features of it. If you are starting to work with CloudSlang and IntelliJ, we highly recommend to use it. It's pretty cool. You can also, of course, contribute to GitHub because it's an open source. It kind of looks like this. Extracted. I did a print screen from one of the flows, like Amazon AWS EC2. You can see the CloudSlang icon here, so it kind of recognizes the SLs. And then we have nice templates. When you write, for instance, flow, it puts you a template, a nice template with name, inputs, and any directives that you need to put. Of course, highlighting, and even more like warnings in case of descriptions missing or any other kind of stuff. So again, we encourage you to use it. Pretty cool. Now, everything that I showed goes to GitHub, as I mentioned originally. These are just some of the main repositories that exist there. So github.com, CloudSlang. You can see here the CloudSlang itself, which contains language, the CLI, the builder, the content where we promote the content. I provided a link here, but don't worry. I'm planning to add several other links by the time we'll announce the video, the recording from today. So you have some nice links to GitHub and some other places that you can start with. Now that we discussed about the CloudSlang content, I would like to actually say a few words about it before we actually jump to the workflow designer. That is, if you don't have some questions already. Okay, so if there are no questions, let's jump to content. Okay, yes, let me try to take those. You know what? I'm proposing to you guys one thing. So if the questions will be put in the question manager, I'll try to address those at the end. Hi, Peter. I think you have a question, or I saw Peter raised his hand. So any written question, either from the question section or from the chat that are related to the topic, I'll try to answer them at the end, okay? I think it's much better this way. And if you are going to do any verbal question, then of course, I'll try to handle them on spot. Okay. So let's get back to this one and we'll handle those written questions later. So content overview. As I mentioned, okay, let's move this pointer not to confuse you. Open source on GitHub. We are talking about textual workflows and operations in YAML base, human readable, Python and Java actions. But there are a few things that I still want to talk because we'll jump to the workflow designer. So we need to discuss briefly about packaging. I think it's important for you to understand that we came up with a packaging model. It's similar to what we had with AFL. Like we'll provide base content pack with generic content as we are used to have. And then we decided to split on provider content packs. Like for instance, if you are doing VMware or Microsoft Azure content that we want to release as content packs. So we will do particular content packs for those. So it means we need to come up with a delivery plan. So the delivery model, I guess it's the one you are kind of used to it, right? So it's either open source and releases in GitHub, and every single content will get there as well. But it's also content packs and CSA capsules that will go to the marketplace HPE Live Network. Those content packs will get into the OO and CSA installers as well. In terms of versioning, not much to mention. It's semantic versioning. Like the example here, CC base CP 1.0.0. A few resources that could get you started in understanding what we have in terms of the content. Now, in terms of hybrid cloud provisioning, because we'll eventually reach to Amazon Azure for the demo today, I wanted to say that in general, we try to solve several use cases, like for instance, provision, deprovision, VMs or instances. And we try to solve the main, let's say, operate things like start, stop, restart instances or VMs, being able to flex in CPU, memory, and all kind of things. So that's why we kind of focused in the first time around Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, sorry, VMware, vSphere, and we ended up with this kind of structure that you see in the left side, in the right side, sorry. So currently we have VMware, vCenter, Web Services, EC2, and Azure. Their structure is as you see it, and you'll see at least the Amazon Web Services today in the demo. So we are handling images, instances, network-related stuff, regions, signatures, snapshots, tags, and volumes, all kind of things that you can do from EC2 itself. From the UI, we try to cover in the API where it made sense to be covered. So this is about the hybrid cloud provisioning. Packaging is similar. The versions here. Now I'm just seeing. I forgot to update this. I apologize for that. When you'll jump to the marketplace to the HPLN, you'll see different versions. But anyway, as I mentioned, it's semantic versioning. I think vCenter, the released one is 1.02 and the other ones are 1.01. Okay, again, open sourcing CloudSlang and content packs for those two, as we already mentioned. Now, why did I mention this? Is because I want to jump to the workflow designer, actually show you in the demo these content packs. So I wanted to make sure you understand where these content packs come from. Now, about the workflow designer, we'll jump to the demo. But before that, let me run a few slides because I think it's important to highlight. So let's think a little bit about the strategic view. Now, imagine that we have the language where we have items like CloudSlang content that I showed you, which is YAML based, is the new content or available in open source, and the AFL content, the content that we were used to when, for instance, building stuff from the desktop studio. Now, this content needs to be built somewhere, right? So there is like an authoring lane, and it needs to be run also somewhere. So we have the runtime here. So if we go even further and picture the authoring, for the AFL content, we have the desktop studio. Now for the CloudSlang content, I mentioned, for instance, IntelliJ. So we have EDEs. More and more people are willing to switch to EDEs. And we got this from the field, various customers that they are willing to switch to this. They are desiring to do that. So you can basically write CloudSlang content in IntelliJ, as I mentioned. You also have the workflow designer on the same level. So the workflow designer is the web-based version of Studio, I would say, which, as I mentioned, is embedded currently in CSA 4.8. So either EDE or workflow designer allows you to create CloudSlang content. Now, all this content that we are talking about can be eventually run in OS Central. Like, for instance, we have the AFL content or the CloudSlang content as well. It can be run in OS Central. So I mentioned at the very beginning, OS Central 1070 supports CloudSlang 1.0. Of course, CloudSlang content can also be run from the CloudSlang CLI, which is something you can jump to GitHub, download, and use. Simply take it and trigger your CloudSlang content or the CloudSlang content that is available in GitHub. So what I'll show you next, it's basically on this path. It's on Workflow Designer, CloudSlang content, or Central. So we'll jump to the Workflow Designer where I'll show you some flows designing CloudSlang. and eventually will reach to the O central and will trigger those flows. This is what I want to show you as a demo. And this is pretty much about the strategic view. Now, a few more things about Workflow Designer before jumping in. I already mentioned it, and I think it's obvious, but still it's worth mentioning. It is web-based designer, and it is meant to allow one to do hybrid authoring. So to be able to do a graphical authoring as well as a textual authoring. Now, the version that you have today in CSA 4.8 does not allow you to do the textual. It only allows you to view the textual representation. But the future versions, we will be able to provide you this kind of features. Workflow Designer brings together a simple authoring experience, and I will mention here that it mainly focuses on the fact that it gives you simple authoring accessibility. Basically, you don't need to have your studio installed somewhere. As I mentioned, it's web-based. It will be very easy to use. It currently has, of course, the HP look and feel. As we know, the Desktop Studio couldn't be 100% aligned. It was never aligned to the HP. But this one, it does. We struggle to be that. It means you kind of have the same experience as a user, both in Central and Designer. And of course, it has increased operating system support metrics. As we know, there are a lot of customers who requested us in the past the ability to be able to run the Desktop Studio in Linux, for instance. So with the introduction of the Workflow Designer, you don't need to, of course, install it anymore. Meaning that it's actually a web-based server. It can be installed, of course, in Linux, and then you just consume it as an author in the browser. These are a few of the qualities that the designer has. And if we are going to focus on the main advantages, I will say these three ones that I've put here. No installation for authors, okay? So it's basically better time to value, and it's also lower total cost of ownership. You don't need to have a lot of configurations and installations in the environment. It's one server where you put it, and pretty much that's it. And of course, it will imply, and it implies easy upgrade procedures. It can be embedded in applications, so you basically can access it directly from your relevant context. Let's put it like that. As I mentioned, and I will repeat, it's currently available in CSA 4.8. It also has the advantages of future governance capabilities. So today we are not quite there, but if we are to think a little bit, with the introduction of the Workflow Designer, you will be able to control the imported CP's version much more easily for the users using it. And best practices can be enforced much more easily. These are the main advantages that we see. As I mentioned, the future governance capabilities, something that we see as future improvements of the designer. Now, I would like to move on, switch to the demo, unless, of course, you have some particular questions at this stage. Okay, if not, then let me proceed to the demo. So what we'll do, we'll launch and terminate some EC2 instances, and we'll do that with the help of CloudSlang based. Before launching and terminating those instances, I want to jump to the workflow designer and show you a few things there. We'll basically walk together on top of some of the out-of-the-box flows that we have around Amazon AWS. Then I'll show you a small flow, custom flow that I did in order to be able to trigger it for this demo. We'll switch to the Amazon AWS and eventually to the O Central from where we will trigger the flow. Okay, so give me one moment to switch to the browser. And I hope you can see my browser as well. This is the CSA, and I will log into it. Provided the wrong password. So there are a few more changes to the CSA folder. I will not talk about those. You will notice first this nice looking menu here. We'll go to the workflows section and we'll jump to orchestration and designer. Now orchestration will open for us the central. I don't want it, and at this stage we'll return back and open it. And while the designer will open us the designer. It is opened in a different tab. This is the workflow designer. You will see that logged in with the user that we logged into the CSA. And I already did a few things here. So let me show you. First, I imported the content packs. By using the import content pack module, you will be familiar with the procedure. It's both similar to the central and studio import. You can simply drag and drop CloudSlang based content packs here. After you drag them here, they are basically uploaded. Everything goes fine. You will be able to import it. This is what I basically did. So I ended up with this flow content packs. As I mentioned, we have the base content pack and then the cloud provisioning, Azure, vCenter, AWS. I can do a few more things here, but let me show you, for instance, for the AWS, because eventually we'll get there. Like, for instance, I can filter for deploy, and it will show me that we have deploy instance and undeploy instance. I will want to show you briefly these ones. Give me a few moments, we'll get back to those. First, I want to show you some other stuff that we have in Designer, like for instance, the projects. So I already created a small demo project for us today with a folder structure and flows and operations that you can put here. So for instance, for the Amazon, I created a small flow. This is the flow that will run today. We will run together from Central. We'll get to it. I just wanted to show you briefly that you have the folder structure, and that once you get to a particular layer, you can add folders or flows. You can also add system properties. If you go to the system properties level, you can do that, and I already added. We'll get back to this system property. I'll show you how it looks like. You can do, of course, deployment, and we'll do the deployment from these buttons. And I already integrated with Git. So my repository, I actually imported the repository from Git. My repository is already in Git. This is very easy to do from the import repository. Either do it with HTTPS or SSH, for instance. And then you have the SCM panel here, which, for instance, it tells me that I have some modifications on the deploy and undeploy EC2 instance that I didn't commit yet to Git. So you will be able to either pull some changes from Git or commit those. Pretty straightforward and easy to use. I will not do the Git operations right now, mainly because most of the things that I'm showing you are also catch in some videos that we have released in YouTube. The link to those videos are part of the links that I mentioned you before that I will provide by the time of this video being actually released. So getting back, because we'll eventually want to reach to the Amazon EC2 deployment, let's first dig into the deploy instance, because this will allow us to see a few more features. So I can open the deploy instance from here. From this button, I can understand that it's read-only. It's part of a dependency of a content pack. You should be already familiar with this fact. This is how the CloudSlang based flow looks like in the graphical manner. Now, I have the ability, as I mentioned before, to view it in a textual manner. This is just a viewer at this stage. This is how the CloudSlang flow looks like in the YAML-based format that I mentioned at the very beginning. We have the descriptions, the flow descriptions that, as I mentioned, was added in CloudSlang 1.0. It's pretty big flow description here. And then the actual coding behind it appears. It's, I would say, easy to read once you are familiar with the formats and name and inputs. I think they are very easy to understand. There are a few things which are added at the end of the CloudSlang based format, which is the extensions. I just wanted to mention those, but without getting into the details, these are related to the display format, the graphical interface. Okay, what else you have once you open it? Well, you have the inputs and outputs panel. So let's say I go on the run instances, I double click it. By the way, this is the starting point of the flow. Then I'll get to have this pop-up, very nice pop-up with inputs and outputs, where we can do and actually understand several things. Now, because this is a read-only flow, we cannot do that much. We can just understand a few things, like, for instance, the fact that this is a constant input, the fact that this comes from the workflow itself. I can tell you that this comes from the flow value, actually, from the flow level value. Of course, you have the outputs. The same, these are read-only outputs. Nothing major there. I want to show you now the default failure. You remember that I mentioned that we have in CloudSlang an on failure section that you can define. So this is basically it, the default failure. What it means you can easily define what happens on the failures. So imagine a world in which, for instance, let's say that the run instance here, you will not need to, for instance, link it to this failure, because it basically in my flow actually. Okay, we have also properties for the flow, where we can see description, where we can see results, outputs, and inputs. These are flow level stuff. They are all controllable once your item is, of course, not read-only. Now, going back to deploy instance, I want to just have a double look together with you around what this deploy instance from Amazon EC2 does. So we are basically triggering an operation. If I go here, drill down into this step, it will pop up the run instances. This is a Java-based operation. I can easily understand that by the gov and by the fact that it's Java here. So I can understand that it triggers the execute from the run instances action. Of course, I can view some properties like the inputs of this and the outputs, results, and description. So what we are doing, we are basically triggering an operation that is launching EC2 instances. As soon as those instances are launched with success, we are checking the instance of that. If the instance is running, then we are proceeding into creating some tags. And then we are trying to collect some information, like for instance, IP addresses. This is what the subsequent steps are doing here. Like we are getting instance details and then doing some passing of the IP addresses. So if everything goes well, we'll eventually end up in a test scenario in which we'll basically have an Amazon EC2 instance deployed. If something goes wrong on several paths, as you can see here, the terminate instances is being triggered. Now, this particular item here, for instance, is marked with a very nice icon, which says, or at least to me, because I'm already aware of it, says that this is a loop step. I mentioned earlier that we have loop and parallel loops. So this is an example of a loop step, for instance. I can tell you by the fact that it has this icon, but also by the fact that it has loop details, for instance, in the input section. Like for instance, it does a loop of several times. It loops several times and waiting for the instance to actually reach a particular state. Like for instance, in this case, it's waiting for the instance to reach the running state. This is what it basically does. I just wanted to emphasize on the loop details item here. As mentioned, this is something that you can view in the YAML-based format. Let's try to identify it. It should be pretty easy. So it's checking the instance tab. As you can see, it's doing that in loop. So loop for step in range. These are this is, by the way, another custom function that we have. We have, I think, 3 functions: get sp, as I mentioned, the get and the check empty. So while being in a loop, it does this check pretty neat, and then it's collecting the responses. Okay, this is what the deploy instance does. We'll see how it runs, and then we have the undeploy instances, which is available here. It basically collects your inputs, of course, identity, credential, and several other inputs that are relevant for EC2 web service. Then it terminates the instance. Everything goes well. It checks the instance state so that it reaches the terminated state, because this is the way that Amazon puts the instances. It puts the instances in a terminated state for, I think, a configurable time frame, like 20 minutes or something. So after which those will disappear by themselves. Okay, so if we were to run these flows, like deploy instance and undeploy instance, and I actually want to run these flows, we'll end up with an instance in Amazon, and then we'll actually terminate it. Now, before that, let me show you briefly, if we are still here, the AWS structure as shown in the slide. So I just wanted to show you that it's not just about instances as much as it's more. Okay, so we have a lot of actions here, and you can see we are controlling several areas in the EC2. Okay, now let's try to jump to the run, and I will run this flow. So this is the flow that I created as part of the demo project. It's basically deploying an instance in Amazon. Then it waits for the particular instance. Like for instance, it waits here for 2 minutes until it decides to actually undeploy it. Let's say, I don't know, I need this instance for 2 days, then I can just simply deploy it, keep it for 2 days, and then will the undeploy instance jump in. So let's try to run this flow that I have here. And I know I'm repeating myself, but you can see my failures are not linked to any failure. Why? Because they will go to this default failure that I have. And in my particular case, I decided, for instance, to put here a right to fly operation. So in case my steps, any of these steps will fail, they will go to this right to file. So I'm putting in a deploy and undeploy file, which I define here, an exception, the exception that I'm collecting from each and every single step. Okay, so we'll not go into this failure path anyway today, but I just wanted to show you the default failure. But now let's run this flow. I already deployed it in Central, but because I want to show you the deployment, I will do it again. So this is how you are deploying it. You are selecting the project, simply go to the deploy as content pack to Central. You're putting here a version. Let's put 1.05. Okay, it will go to my Central. Should deploy there. Now the deployment, of course, is done with the same user. So the user, this admin user needs to, at least in my case, it has the deployment capability in Central. Okay, now let's switch to Central to see it deployed there. So for that, I need to go to the orchestration in CSA. So while the Central will pop up, actually, let's move to Amazon. I want to show you what we'll actually do instances. Okay, so we are talking about EC2 instances. This is the Amazon Web Service UI. As I showed you, we are doing some things. So it's not just instancing. We are doing network related stuff and some other. But today I'll show you just the instances. This is what I have in my list. So as soon as I will start the flow in Central, a new instance will pop up here. We'll see it being added to several things, like for instance, the name will appear with a custom demo name that I gave, and it will be added in particular areas that I've put in my flows. So we are basically mimicking this launch instance, right, from Amazon. Now, all these steps are basically done by our flow. And eventually the same flow will actually do this instance state terminate. Okay, I will not trigger it, but this is, I just wanted to show you what will actually happen. So launch instance will be performed by the flow, and then the terminate on the same instance will be performed by the flow after 2 minutes. Okay, let's switch back to the Central. I should have the flow now with my content pack being deployed. You see version 1.05, it was deployed directly from Workflow Designer. And now let's deploy the flow. We have just 7 minutes, I think. Deploy and undeploy instance, yes. Okay, so this is my flow. Let's run it briefly. I have some flow level inputs that I've put that I need. They don't matter at this stage. Let's simply run it and go to the run management. I want to show you here. Okay, so you see the run instance is being triggered as it's checking the instance state. As I mentioned, it does that in a loop. It means it waits for it to reach the running state. So it's still waiting because it didn't reach. So let's switch back to the Amazon briefly. Yes. So let's do a refresh. You see it now. It's demo, as I mentioned. It's in running state. So because it's in running state, it means that the flow should have continued now. We will return back there, but I just wanted to show you, okay? It was created by the flow. Yes, I gave it to be part of the skin. It doesn't really matter. So it's running now. It's going into initializing phase. Let's get back to the flow itself. You see all this part of deploy instance completed and completed with success. Now it's just Amazon initializing phases that occur. Okay, and after 2 minutes, we'll get back here after 2 minutes. So keep instance live for X seconds is the step that I added. This instance should be removed. Okay, so pretty cool. Let's wait for it to run, and let's move to the Amazon. Should be removed pretty soon. Yep. Get back. I don't think those 2 minutes passed, so maybe we can just take a look. Okay, so we are launching the instance as I mentioned. So we check the instance state, a particular state that we gave there, like the running. Then we created the tags. You see the OO demo tag here. Well, of course you see it here. You see this is the OO demo. I hard coded some values for the particular demo today, and it also has a tag of month. This is what I chose, February. Anyway, it created those tags, and then it got the details of it in order to be able to get the IP address. The IP address somewhere here. Doesn't really matter. Okay, now the seconds passed. Okay, so it took 2 seconds, and then it's going into, as I mentioned, undeploy instance. Let's switch back. My flow is being triggered, is now shutting down the instance as expected. And pretty much that's it. The undeployment will conclude at this stage. And if everything goes well, as soon as the instance gets into the terminated state, the undeploy will finish. Okay, now we have 4 more minutes. Pretty much this is it about the demo, and pretty much this is it about Workflow Designer and CloudSlang today. Okay, thank you guys. I don't want to keep you.
Thank you.
Pretty sure it's late for some of you or early in the morning. As mentioned, we'll make sure we have the recording. We'll keep up to date. And thank you again, and see you soon. If you have further questions, don't hesitate. Contact us. Okay, take care.